something was missing at the beginning of the service, and that is that the tune we've been singing was missing at the beginning of the service. That's because the Mission and Outreach Committee folk thought it was a good idea for those of you who might be visiting or the snowbirds who had not previously gotten a chance to see the video that came out of the United Church of Christ, Three Great Loves, that this might be a great time to show it, since that is what we're trying to keep our focus upon last year and keep it focus upon this coming year. So we're going to take a minute and let you see the images. And if you're prone to sing along, by all means, feel free to sing along.
I will sing of your love, 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 of your steadfast love, for as long as I live, and I will sing of your love, 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 for as long as I live. I will sing of a love so wide that it welcomes the neighbor and will not divide. And I will sing of your love, 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 for as long as I live. I will sing that the children come, do not hinder them, for you love everyone. And I will sing of your love, 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 for as long as I live. I will sing of the trees so tall, of the ocean so deep, and your love for them all. And I will sing of your love, 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 for as long as I live. Your love is stronger than the mountains, soaks through me like the pouring rain. It's no wonder that I'm answering your call. Whenever someone needs a neighbor, and wherever there's a child in pain, we'll be working on a just world for all. Your love is stronger than the mountains, of your love, 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 of your steadfast love.
I've always made it a habit in every church I've ever pastored, on the Sunday when there was an annual meeting, to take time to look back and give thanks for what was, the work that was done in the past year, as well as look forward to the call into the future, because God is always out there into the future bidding us to come and follow. So I want to begin this inventory this morning where it needs to begin, with some gratitude. So I'm going to ask some folk to stand. If you're not comfortable standing, you can just lift your arm and wave at everybody, because I think there are some folk we want to acknowledge here today and express our thanksgiving. So, where should I start? Oh, let's start with the governing board of Cocoa Beach Community Church. With those of you who have been on the board this past year, either wave your hand or stand. Come on. What a bunch of modest people. Come on, let's thank them properly. There's been a lot of committee people who have gone around this year scratching their heads on what in the world are we doing with the new structure, and some of those folk were on the board. And so, we got to give it to people who have found their way through that maze, and we so do appreciate their commitment. Let's move on to the second group. Well, the choir. What can you say about a group of people who get together every Wednesday night, working away, be it a cantata or music that's coming, whatever it is, Holy Day services, Holy Week, I think they're probably more worn out than I am. So, thank you, choir. And then there's all the volunteers, so many. Those who have hosted the social hour or hosted Sunday dinners, set up communion, filled bags to give out to people who drop by the thrift shop or the church office who need some nutrition and water. Those who have helped with the beach Easter service by carrying all kinds of stuff and setting up out there. Those who have decorated or undecorated the church for the holidays. Those who have helped with the sound and visual aids who sit up in the balcony and you never see. Those who have fixed the Lenten supper or provided lunch for spiritual enrichment program or helped with some tasks to aid the larger community. For those of you who have gone out of the way to participate in Fiesta Brevard or Space Coast Pride or whatever it is, those who have done anything this year to volunteer, come on, give yourselves a wave or a stand here. What? That's most of you. I know it's most of you. What a blessing you are. What about the members of the Women's Fellowship? What about them? Where are you, Women's Fellowship members? That's right. Those of you who are visitors or only come through part of the year, you have no way of knowing how important they are, not just in terms of their ministry and building up their own fellowship, but also in terms of helping with the church budget. Incredible kind of ministry that's there in the church for the whole church, and we are so grateful for the work you do. Thrift store workers, let's see your hands. Look at that. Sometimes we get in our mind that the thrift store exists, to help people get rid of stuff or people to buy stuff that they don't really need because it's cheap. We forget exactly all that they do, that sometimes they are helpful to people who actually are down to their last dime and need some help for basic things like a shirt to put on their back. And they help the church also in terms of the budget because they bless us in that kind of way as well. So thank you, thrift store workers. And I would be absolutely the worst human being walking if I didn't thank those who I find truly significant for me as I labor in my ministry here, and that's my co-workers. Those folk who labor in and out through the year to help take care of worship and take care of all kinds of tasks. So I want to thank Jan, of course. Dave's hiding over there. This year we've had both Jerry and Susie who have been working with cleaning up and setting up the church. Coleman, I know you're up there. Thank you. Yes. And Nancy's not here, but Nancy came in the middle of the year and took over just, in almost no time of transition. And she fit right in, and it's been incredible how things have worked and how relatively smoothly things have gone. So thanks be to God for all those who have labored and continue to labor in ministry. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. We faced challenges this year. Every time you turned around, we faced challenges. Building repair debt. Check. You did amazing with that. Absolutely amazing in paying that debt off. Those of you who were courageous, last year's annual meeting is making a stand as an open, affirming congregation and living into that. Check. Living into a new structure that many had never seen before. Check. What can I say? You have tried and you have been wonderful in your willingness to struggle with that new structure and to make it work, and I thank you for that. Welcoming people with open hearts and minds and incredible hospitality. I brag about that all the time. Check. You just amaze me with that. You faced those challenges one by one, and you did it with incredible zeal and commitment. Any one of those challenges could have taken the wind out of the sails of most churches where I've pastored, any one of them. And yet throughout the year, you have prevailed at holding the course and trying to make it work. And I believe it's because that we were able to face them because there is a wind, the holy wind called in Hebrew, Ruach, the Spirit of God that blows strongly in this community. And I thank you for that. And thank God for blessing us in that kind of way. We may feel somewhat like those disciples up on the mountain when Jesus was transfigured. Let's build us a little, let's build us a little place here and stay up here. And Jesus looks at him and shakes his head and says, got to go down. That's where the hurting people are. Got to keep moving. That's exactly what we have to do. We are thankful for 2019. But 2020 has hit us. And now turning our attention to 2020 brings us to today's lectionary text from the gospel. Let's consider it just for a moment. What exactly is the church to be about? It's what we ought to always be asking. What exactly is the church to be about? It's a primary question every year that should be on our agenda and in our conversations. Jesus hears that John's been arrested. Caesar's restless. Not good news for Jesus. So what does he do? He leaves his home in Nazareth and he heads toward Galilee, a place of many Gentiles, non-Jewish folk. Even the prophet Isaiah says that the people in Galilee have seen a great light hundreds of years before Jesus went there to minister. Jesus went there and began to proclaim, repent, for the realm of God has come near. The rule of God is very near. Next, he walks up to two brothers. Simon, that we know as Peter, and Andrew. You know, Clarence Jordan used to always make note of the fact that you were named as a son of in those days. And so if you look at it that way, we could call them Rock and Andy Johnson. They were casting their nets, fishing. Jesus walks up, and if we'd have been there in Aramaic, he might have said, well, come on, follow me, and I'll make you fish for people. They dropped their nets, their livelihood, and they followed. He approached two more folk, James and John, both in the boat with their dad, and they simply left and followed. Matthew doesn't tell us how the dad felt about that. Note, if you will, Jesus began checking in among the religious folk, went to the synagogues, preached as a rabbi, began telling people the good news that God's realm was very near. People began coming to Jesus, we're told. They came with expectations. It's always good when people come to where the community of faith is gathered and they have expectations. Because too often, when people think the community of faith is gathering, I need to be as far away from that bunch as possible. But in Jesus' day, the word got around, and they began coming. They came from across the region. The sick, those in pain, demoniacs. Keep in mind that the demoniacs that get referred to oftentimes in the New Testament were probably what we would call in today's age people with mental illnesses. Epileptics, paralytics. And Jesus cured them. Those drawn to Jesus, they weren't necessarily the privileged. Those known as the righteous ones, those who kept the fast and the feast just right, or made their sacrifices in the perfect way, those who came to Jesus, well, they were broken, and they needed someone to make them whole. These were folk who probably cared little about what name was used for God. And they were hurting, truly hurting, often desperate. We've only begun exploring the many loves of God when we talk about these three being lifted up in the UCC. The days ahead will continue to present opportunities for growth, not just numbers, but growth. I'm getting old, and I still have a hunger to grow. I still want to learn, and I still have places that need healing. And so I gather with folk like you expecting that the reign of God is very near. Have you ever thought about how many church folk think about church growth? When they think church growth, they may not say it, but they're thinking, we want people to come here. And we want people to join with us. We're most comfortable with folk like ourselves. You know, people who look like us, dress like us, use English like us, have similar expressions to ours. But the realm of God being represented by Jesus is represented by a community of people, and the only obvious criteria here is folk who are broken and willing to follow. I heard a story this week, a sad story. There was a church offering a kind of an alternative worship service, but it was laid out more as a time to help meet people's needs. There were street people there, hungry people, people who were experiencing homelessness, people who had had a hard time, people who had yet to find their way into a recovery program. Conversations were taking place about that church's ministries. And as they were lifting up the particular ministry, they came to this one. And a leader in the church said, well, so-and-so and so-and-so, and reported about this gathering. But they're not the kind of people we really want here. Strange, isn't it? Another show of hands. Has anyone here ever heard of a beetle spin? Anybody? I should have known Betty would. Maybe you've heard somebody talk about a chub lure or just a spinner bait. Or maybe they'll talk about squid or crab or night crawlers or shiners. Back up in the mountains, we even talked about Niblet's corn. Yeah, the bluegill and trout actually would hit it sometimes. You see, some of us, we know about bait and lures because some of us sometimes go fishing for specific fish, our kinds of fish, and we use specific baits. Well, that's not how fishing was done by those disciples who followed Jesus. They threw out the net, and everything that was there came in, and everything had a purpose and was kept. We read this story about the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and we really get it. Every fish in the net is important to everyone. That's why when I go fishing, I don't go fishing for one thing. I just hope I get something. It was important, every fish. This is the reality, friends, of Jesus' calling. And following Jesus leads us to uncomfortable places. And sometimes, as we read about Jesus' journey and his disciples, to dangerous places. That said, I'm thinking of Maya Angelou's book that came out a number of years ago, I Wouldn't Take Nothing from My Journey Now. And as I get older, that book and that song behind the book has become more important to me. When I dropped my nets and left those mountains of North Carolina where there were many characters, by the way. And I took off trying to follow Jesus. I began meeting some strange people, and I've never really looked back. I thought as I was preparing the sermon about David Pinto, whom I'm sure I've mentioned before. He became a roommate while I was in college. The Baptist students on this Baptist college campus had kind of worked him over. He was from where was then referred to in the West as Bombay. And everybody wanted to convert David. He actually had invited me to move in with him because he thought that I was safer than the guy who identified himself as a Nazi that he drew out his first semester. David was quite brilliant. He'd be working on one of those 5-hour math classes late at night when I was trying to go to sleep, and I would hear him, "Middleton, how are you going to feel about walking on those streets of gold while I'm burning in hell?" He always got to me in some wonderful ways. A senior high group, 35 members of a senior high group in a church north of Raleigh where I worked my first year in seminary. Kids who stayed high most of the time. It was, after all, the 70s, the early 70s. They were fascinating, and they stretched my patience beyond what I could imagine. But many grew up, and they sent back words of gratitude, and it blessed my life. Jackie, also a drug user, whom I met at East Carolina University when I was doing campus ministry. I asked Jackie, he was like to build things, and I asked him to build us a ramp, a handicap ramp. And he obliged, but he sometimes had trouble with measurements. And so when I asked him to build a guinea pig cage for my daughter's birthday, I was going to get her a guinea pig, he built one a yard cube, and I had to get down in the guinea pig cage to paint the bottom. A farmer in the swamp, Melvin, who let his dog drive his truck around the field. No, you can't make this stuff up. Brownie always found some way to miss the house, and most often it seemed he would simply let the truck roll up against the clothesline, and it would stop and Brownie would get out. A gay Mormon organist who worked with me in the church in Cincinnati, who had kind of left the Mormon church because they were not fond of gay people, he perceived. But he was somewhat superstitious, and so he refused to give up his Mormon underwear. And we used to joke with him every Sunday morning if he had his armor on, if you will. A truck driver who used to threaten my life. He had killed somebody one time, and he used to threaten my life over the answer machine because he thought I was Father Sikorsky, who had set him up with the FBI. But he kept coming to church and commenting on my sermons and never killed me, as it turned out. A drag queen whose performance life had come to an end. But Tommy had yet to find his place in the world. And he continued to come and journey because he needed to know somebody somewhere loved him. The list could go on and on. I thought of even stranger people, but I thought that would be enough to get you thinking. We're called to follow and to fish for people because we are the church. And our big welcome must get ever bigger. Oh, not because we need numbers. I used to worry about that when I was out of seminary because I thought if you didn't have the numbers, you'd get fired. And I thought you needed numbers to get the bureaucrats to pay attention to you, but I don't really care about being fired or the bureaucrats worrying about me anymore. We need to grow because the realm of God is near. People need to know that they're loved. People in broken places with great woundedness. We need to follow and grow because it's what we're called to do and who we're called to be. So the state of this church for me is a place of great gratitude for how you have worked and what you have done and your faithfulness. The state of the church for the months to come is that we deepen our commitment and we kind of pull up our bootstraps, even though we are not wearing boots for the most part, and we press toward the mark, that is the high calling of following Jesus. And December 31st, 2020 comes, we can look back, take a deep breath, and say with a smile, well, thanks be to God for that one. Let's see what the next one brings. May God help us be the church always. Amen.